Well, what does the big, beautiful bill do to student loan opportunities? Are private loans the way to go? How do we fund college in this new environment? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, a lot has changed on the student loan landscape, leaving parents and students wondering what is the best route to go when it comes to college funding. Today, college admissions expert John Hupalo is here to weigh in. John, always good to get your input. How you doing?
Bob, I'm doing great. Nice to be with you and love this new time slot. So looking forward to having this conversation today.
And I want to tell listeners that this is one of the things that we do. We have contributors come on the program, and John has been doing radio with me for years. And he comes on the program once a month. And something I want to stress is that you can go to his website, mycollegecorner.com. And the great thing that he has poured so much of his expertise into that site. You can go to that site and everything costs nothing. His book has a price on it, but in his book is a great manual as to how to navigate the waters of college funding. We talk about this every month because it is one of the biggest investments that you'll make as a parent, and make sure that you're doing it the right way. And you know, what's interesting, John, is that you had kind of the pre-Big Beautiful Bill and the post-Big Beautiful Bill. And during the pre-Big Beautiful Bill, before that got signed into law, you had such if you wanted to go to college, all you had to do is sign your name on a piece of paper. Didn't even really have to have great credit or anything. And you can mortgage the entire amount up and pay for it later. Now we're down to restrictions, probably what it needed to be in the first place. Talk a little bit about the new rules that will apply to, your freshmen in 2026, because it's not going to be like it is today.
Yeah, it's not, Bob, and this is the first time since 1965 that the system has been turned upside down the way it has. And that's really pretty fundamental change. So clearly the line was drawn in the sand when the one big beautiful bill was signed. I was in Washington not long ago, and I heard that the acronym for it is OB3.
Everything's got a brand.
And everybody, so they probably paid some consultant a lot of money to come up with OB3. But the reality is, for those who don't want to get involved in any of the politics, the other name, and his listeners may hear this over time, is referred to as H.R. 1. H.R. is House Resolution. That was the first bill in the Congress. But H.R. 1, One Big Beautiful Bill, OB3, whatever you call it, the name is not really as important as the effect. And the reality is that the game really has changed for certain. And this is really the key element of this. It's changed for certain folks who are going to go to school. And so let's just unpack that a little bit. What has not changed for a freshman, so the freshman who's going to start next summer, the summer of 26, so that's academic year 26-27, these are the high school seniors now who are going through the application process, and they're going to get their financial aid award letters coming the first part of next year. And on that financial aid award letter, it'll say, guess what, because you filled out the FAFSA form, and let's start there for your listeners who haven't heard this before, the free application for federal student aid is critically important. I know, Bob, you filled it out for your two boys, and everyone who wants any kind of federal aid, so a student loan, potentially a Pell Grant, a work-study award, and all kinds of other aid. By the way, some colleges use it and some states use it as well, but that FAFSA form, it's now available on studentaid.gov. Go up there and start that process. They've done a really good job, frankly, of streamlining it so you can put some information in, you hit the button, that says pre-fill my tax information, which is back to 2024 filing. So you hit that button, it pre-fills, you put some other information in, and you can get through it fairly quickly. So a little bit of a tangent, but I don't think we can talk about federal loans and what's changed and what's the same without telling folks that they've got to make sure that that FAFSA gets filed in a timely way. So that's step number one. Step number two of that is, okay, what happens with the FAFSA form? And I'm not going to go through the detail of that right now. We can talk another time about what that whole process looks like. But at the end of the day, the question is, will that student be eligible for a federal student loan? And that process will take them to a conclusion that they'll be eligible for either a subsidized or an unsubsidized loan or some combination. And subsidized and unsubsidized, just a fancy way of saying who's paying the interest while the student's in school. If it's a subsidized loan, the government is subsidizing it, so they're actually going to pay the interest. And for those families who have a little bit higher up the economic spectrum, they may get an unsubsidized loan, which means that they would be responsible for paying the loan interest while the student's in school, or just what they call capitalizing, which means not paying the interest but adding it on to the balance of the loan. So that was a real mouthful, but at the end of the day, for a freshman starting next year, they'll be eligible for up to $5,500 of direct loans. There's no credit test. There's no asset test. Literally every single student in the country is eligible for a federal direct loan. So that hasn't changed at all.
You know, I guess that obviously there's going to be gaps in the funding based on the new rules that are coming into effect.
Yep.
The next step is private loans. Talk a little bit about the pros and cons of that route.
I will, and I'll get to answer. You asked me the first question, which I guess I didn't really answer very well, so I'll do that right now. What's different, and what created the gap that you just talked about? And this is that next group of people, and there could be an awful lot of them in this group, but these are folks who were relying on federal PLUS loans. So PLUS is an acronym for Parent Loan to Undergraduate Student. And as the name implies, parent loan means that the loan is made to the parents. And in the parent loan model, they cannot transfer that loan to the student after they graduate. There's no way for them to not be the one who's the primary payer on that loan. So that's really critical. Now, before July of 2025, there was a very minimal credit test, which basically was if you didn't have 90-day delinquencies or long delinquencies, you'd basically be eligible for this loan. There was no income test. There's no asset test. The government wasn't really worried whether the parents could pay this loan back or not. And here's the kicker, Bob, and this goes right to the punchline. You could borrow up to the full cost of attendance. So at the top of the show, you said it was a circumstance prior to July of this year that any student basically go to any school and the government would provide the money to make that happen in the form of a loan. Well, that changed, and it changed in July this year for one really critical point. And if we read the newspapers and if we're breathing, we know that there's a default rate problem in the country. So this office said, look, there's probably some correlation between making loans to anybody without any credit testing and the default problems that we're having. And the other place, not just parents, and I'm not trying to say that parents are a big problem here. Parents are trying to help their kids as best they can, but sometimes they were getting overextended by taking more PLUS loans than they could actually afford, and the government wouldn't say no to them. So it was full access to anybody who wanted it. The other group of students who had full access to whatever they needed were graduate students. And some graduate students would take significant amount of loans, no cap on the amount that they could borrow. So in July this year, the federal government said, you know what, this idea of just opening the spigot and allowing parents and graduate students to borrow as much as they want with no real credit test and without it, even maybe not even having a job, we're going to start to do something about that. And what they did is they said to parents that we're going to now cap the amount that you can borrow for your student at $20,000 under the PLUS loan program, an aggregate cap of about $65,000. So for one child, the most they're going to be able to borrow is roughly $65,000. So that really does change the game pretty significantly for parents with undergraduate students. And while we're talking about it, and then we'll talk more about the parents and undergraduate students, but the graduate students are in the same boat in that the government said, you know what, that Grad Plus program, a little bit of a tongue twister for me, the Grad Plus program is making it so available for money that we're going to have to put a stop to that too. So they literally virtually eliminated that program, and now they have loan program for graduate students that are tiered. So they're saying if you're a non-professional, meaning if it's not something other than like a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, maybe MBAs, those kinds of higher earning jobs, you're going to be capped out also in the amount that you can borrow. And you're going to have to go and find another way to get that earnings. And they're going to be capped out, non-professional degrees, at $20,500 per year with a $100,000 lifetime cap. And those professional students, the med students, the dental students, the lawyers, their cap is at $50,000 a year with a $200,000 lifetime cap. So there's a lot of conversation in the market now and with the schools and graduate students and parents about the gap that you're identifying, because it might well be that some families are thinking, hey, we'll send our student to the best school they can get into. We're not worried about what the cost is going to be because the government will give us the money. And on July 4th or 3rd of this year, the government said, well, we're not doing that anymore. So it's a big, big sea shift in how we're thinking about paying for college going forward.
I was just thinking about colleges being up in arms about the big, beautiful bill and the limits that's been putting on them. But they had to know that this party was going to be over with at some point, and that in a way they were taking part of a system that was really putting people in a bad situation.
I agree with you, but I'll have to tell you, I just got home today from the last of what I call the conference season, and so I love this time of year because I went and spent time with the National Association of State Treasurers. There was a big 529 conference, so these are the folks who are helping families save for college. Also, a couple other groups. And at one of those groups' conferences, there were trade organizations representing the schools. And Bob, I'm not kidding when I tell you I almost fell off my chair when the school representatives were saying things like, well, we're going to have to see how much of this sticks because, who knows what's going to happen in the midterm elections or the next presidential cycle, and, it could change. They've got to get their heads out of the sand, Bob, because this is not going to change anytime soon. And you're right, they should have seen it coming. But they were living, frankly, I was in Orlando near Disney World, and I was thinking, these guys still think they're like in Disney World. They're in an imaginary place because it doesn't exist like this anymore. So, yeah, there's a reckoning that's coming. The really good news, I'm going to say from this perspective, is that there's a lot of energy now with those who are helping families save and pay for college to find some ways, creative ways, to try and help them. And I'm going to say this, Bob, in a responsible way, because what you said before, I think, is really critical, and that is in my personal view, there was some abuse of that system of just saying, I'm going to be a professional student. I'll go get 3 or 4 different graduate degrees and maybe a PhD, and one day when I'm 40, I'm going to say, oh, well, how did I wind up with $250,000 of debt, and now I have a job that pays me $50,000 a year? What did these terrible banks do to me? So I think it's going to be some pain here in the short term as people adjust their thinking about how education is going to play a role in their future. Maybe they'll start going for some certificate programs. Maybe they'll start with a junior college or community college. So you know what? I don't have to go to that big fancy school to get the job that I want. I think this has been a long time coming. But you know what happens? when change comes, it can be really stark, and we're going to hear stories of people who are not able to achieve their dream of what they wanted for a college experience, and it's going to happen, and we're going to have to react to it.
I was thinking through this whole process of turning an industry around, basically, and getting it on the right path, which is student loans in colleges. And my greatest concern is the parents who are depending on the current setup to be in place, and to have a freshman that starts in 2026. I mean, I think that is going to be the hardest hit class of freshmen. Don't you agree with that? I mean, it could drastically change a lot of things. I don't want to be over dramatic about it, but I just think that you see that coming, you see the rules coming, the new rules, and you go, well, at some point I'm going to have to jump in and finance this myself. The cap's going to make sure of that.
Well, that's right. And the other. By the way, I agree with everything you just said. And there was something that was said at one of the conferences, which I thought was like right on the mark. Because I actually made the comments that I just made on as we were talking here about this idea that for the first time since 1965,
right,
the promise of full access to college is now not there. And somebody said, that's the first time that the politicians have broken a promise that they've made to people. Like they said for the last 50 years, if you want to go to college, we're going to make sure that you can pay for it. And they just said that's changed. And I thought putting it in that frame of families that were counting on that, it's going to be painful, and that there's going to be a process, and they're going to have to work through it. And one of the things that you said at the beginning, which you and I have been talking about, and I've been talking about a long, long time, is that it's really important for families to think of themselves as consumers of education. Like, what is the price? What is the value? What is, and now they're going to be forced to do that. So when those financial aid award letters come, and it's going to happen this year, and the government's going to say, okay, here's how much we're going to give you, and you either go get a private loan. We haven't talked about that yet, and we should, but you either go get a private loan, or you can't go to the school. And so the pros and the cons, you asked me earlier, very briefly, the pros and the cons of the private loan is that there is no government involved in it, so that's either a pro or a con, depending on how you view that. But the economics are such that the private loan is going to be decided just like a mortgage loan or a car loan or anything. You're going to file an application with a lender, and they're going to look at your resources and say, you know what, we're willing to lend you X amount of dollars now to go to college, and you're going to be able to borrow this based on your credit. And whatever your credit score is going to help determine the interest rate. Right? And we can unpack that in a lot more detail, but at a high level, this idea that they're going to be consumers that go to a bank and say, I need a loan, and the consumption here is education. The other interesting thing is that one of the really great, beautiful attributes of the federal direct loan program was that they were making loans, and they continue to make loans, to 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds who have no prospect of getting a job anytime soon. The private lenders say, we really need to make sure there's someone there who can pay, but we know that the problem with the Parent Plus loan is that it just hooks the parent basically for the rest of their life until they can pay that loan off. So they have a mechanism in the private loan market that allows the parent and the student to apply together, right? And then they're called co-signers, so that both of you can apply at the same time. And the bank looks at the parent's finances and says, okay, you can pay this loan off based on your current income and what you have. And guess what? When the student gets to a position where they can start to make those payments, we'll just release you, the co-signer, the parent, from the obligation, and then the student can pick that up and they can continue to pay until it's done. So I think that that's a pretty good mechanism for some folks, but again, it's totally dependent on the family's ability to pass those credit tests. And if they can't pass those credit tests, they're not going to be able to get a loan. And so just like a very high level, we can talk about this for 2 or 3 shows in detail, but at a high level, a good credit score is a FICO score of between like 670 and 739 or 740. So if you have, and this is for your listeners, if you go to any FICO, Experian, any of those, they'll tell you what your credit score is for free. You can do that today, right? And if you get a score that's basically, I'll say 725 and above, you'll probably be offered a private credit student loan that could work for your circumstance. So 725-ish is about the cutoff. The other thing with these loans based on credit is the lower your credit score, the higher your interest rate, because the lender says, well, you know what, a 725 is a good credit score, but we really like the very good credit scores of 750 and above, and we really, really like those that are above 800. So they have a range there, but they'll likely make a loan as long as you don't have all those delinquencies and all that, but they'll likely make a loan that could make sense. The last part of my little monologue on the private loans and on federal loans is just remember, if you're borrowing in the first year, you're probably going to be borrowing in the second, the third, and the fourth as well.
Right.
So when you get into this, really check. We're going to put a new calculator up on mycollegecorner.com that will allow families to look at the direct loan and see how much that monthly payment will be, and then separately look at the parent loan, either a plus loan or a private loan, and look to see how much those monthly payments will be. And we have a little loan affordability indicator on there that says, if you're a student, you have this major, this is how much you're likely to make, again, within reason, all big estimates. But it'll tell you, okay, this debt that you're going to take for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, when you get out of school, it's going to be a light, a medium, heavy lift. Same thing the parent based on what their income is. So there are tools out there, but parents are going to have to do a little bit more work to figure out what's right for them.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. John's website, once again, is mycollegecorner.com, and you can get a lot of great information there and a lot of education on how the system works. John, I've got roughly about a minute and a half left. I was curious about something. Having been an advisor during the financial crisis, and I remember, as if it were yesterday, when the government basically shut down the student loan business for private banks and took it all over.
That's right.
It's funny to me that we're coming in full circle to that. It's like now they want those private banks to be taking the greatest part of this burden of loaning money. Doesn't that just? I mean, if the private banks weren't good for the system then why are they all of a sudden good for the system today?
Yeah, and Bob, you're 100% right about that. The reality is that in the old system, the federal government was guaranteeing those loans at the bank.
Oh, okay. Right.
And that was it. So they're saying, you know what, we're going to get out of the guarantee business. Instead, they became the largest lender to students with $1.7 trillion on their books. So it's all, very complicated and convoluted. But no, you're right. There is this march back to saying, let the banks be the parent in the room, for lack of a better anecdote. But they'll say to the end consumer, we'll make a loan or we won't, and it's not going to be the federal government saying we're not going to be able to send your kid to the school you want. It's going to be that bank. So it's all shifted, and we have plenty to talk about in the months ahead.
Yeah, because I didn't even get to half of the questions I want to talk to you about. But mycollegecorner.com is the place to go for more information. John, always good to talk to you, and we'll talk to you next month.
Look forward to it, Bob. Be well. Thank you.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. If you've got a question for me, I want to invite you to go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com. There's a link at the top of the page that says Ask Prudent Money. Just go click that link, and then you can ask a question. I'll get right back to you the next day and get you taken care of. We're real serious about that. And if you don't believe that I'll do it, just try me out, because we will answer those questions. And we'll make sure that you are taken care of. college, oh gosh, college funding is so complicated, really, the way it's been set up. And I am concerned about the families who are not that not that borrowing money is the best way to go. It's just that if that was their end game and they accepted everything that goes along with that, then and it's going to be taken away or limited, seriously limited. We'll see what happens. This is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me? Please go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com, as we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.